In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
Hello and welcome to a special Q&A session about the documentary Winter Journey, which is organized by Movies That Matter and Pakhuis de Zwijger. In a few minutes, I will have a conversation with the director of the documentary, Arnas Österko, and the writer of the book, because the movie is based on a book, journalist writer Martin Goldsmith, via the Zoom. And here in the studio with Carina Alders, she's sitting next to me. She's the executive director of the Leo Smith Foundation. And with you, the viewers, the watchers, the kijkers, the audience, the public. So since it's a Q&A session via online, we have 3 rules. Most important, time. We will have 1 hour, and 1 hour, it means in my book, 1 hour. And the other thing is about the technical issues. Sometimes some things can go wrong, but the people from the technical department, they have reassured me that everything will be all right at the end of the day. And the very, very most important thing is the chat. So if you are watching this program through Zoom, you will see this interface, and you can use the chat to chat with us. So if you have any questions or remarks, please send it to us, and I will address the question to the speakers. And it will be the best if you can address your question to one of the speakers specifically, so you can say, I have a question for Carina, or I have a question for Arnas, or I have a question for Martin. So having said that, my name is Baram Sadeghi, and I have the big honor and the bigger responsibility to be your host for tonight. My background is TV, but nowadays I mostly organize and moderate public debates, events like this. Enough about me. Let's go to the picture. Let's go to the documentary. You will see a short piece, about 2 minutes, when you will see young Gunther, the main character. He has just heard that he can play with the Joodse Cultuurbunde. And so he's on his way to them to see how they are playing. So let's start.
So I went, and it was all rather gloomy, hostile. This was their only chance for a meal ticket, and they didn't like to see a newcomer. Oh, you're the new fruiters. Welcome.
Not enough seats in the lifeboat.
No, and there were a lot of eyes on me. I thought, how I'm going to survive these people. But then they started playing, and I tell you, they played like angels. Magnificent.
What piece did you play?
Tchaikovsky's Pathetic.
One of your favorites?
Yeah.
You love that piece?
Yes, I do.
I know you do.
More, I immediately took notice of a viola player. A very pretty viola player. That was her mom.
Ah, yeah.
I knew it. All in one afternoon. I just had to stay.
Despite the danger, you wanted to leave the country.
Despite the danger. This was too good to leave.
deutsche Männer und Frauen, das Zeitalter eines überspitzten jüdischen Intellektualismus ist nun zu Ende.
Okay, let's start the conversation with two people via the Zoom. I will have a conversation with the director and co-screenplayer and the writer of the book. So, Hannes, co-often? I try to say, Hannes, I cannot hear you. So let's see whether it's working or not. Please keep talking.
I was trying to say goedenavond.
Yes. Oh, great. Okay. Hannes, where are you calling from? Where are you right now?
I am in Potsdam, near Berlin, enjoying the good weather here in the green forests around Berlin. So you shouldn't feel sorry for me.
Okay, cool. Let's start with the process of the filmmaking. Since we are on a film festival, so you made a film, and very special film. You used a lot of different techniques we saw in the picture. I will have a question about that. But let's go back to the very starting point of the film. When? How did it start?
Oh, as so often in a kind of casual way, one thing leads to the next. In this case, I was bored in an airport somewhere and came across a new book on the persecution of Jews in the 30s. And I thought to myself, there's probably nothing new to say about this matter. But then I bought the book anyway, because nothing else to read. And then on page, let's say 127, there were 3 sentences about this Jewish cultural league, this Jüdische Kulturbund, of which I've never heard. I never heard of this phenomenon. I was quite amazed to learn that there was this big organization for Jewish artists in the middle of Nazi Germany, and got curious about that. Just simple curiosity. And then it didn't take a lot of Googling until I realized the whole book was written about it from a personal perspective, which was, of course, Martin's book about his parents, the Inextinguishable Symphony. And that, of course, opened a whole new perspective to the story, because it could be personal. It could deal with something I'm passionate about, which is music. And it also addressed, at the same time, I sensed, if nothing else, between the lines, the tensions between the generations, which is so much part of why this film would be relevant today, or the story would be relevant today. It's because it also connects to how generations deal with all those things that happened back then.
Yeah. Okay. And when was it? About which year was it?
This would have been in 2015. In the autumn, so
yeah.
And I think Martin and I met in the early 16 and agreed to move on with this.
Yeah.
And we started shooting in Arizona in early 18.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Can I see Martin? Martin.
Hello.
Hi, Martin.
Hello to you.
Hi. How are you?
Terrific.
Perfect. And where are you calling from?
Just outside Washington, D.C.
I see. So you are not living in Arizona anymore?
I never actually lived there. My parents retired there. My mother was in the Cleveland Orchestra for a number of years. And in 1981, she retired from the orchestra, and she and my father moved to Tucson.
Okay, I see. Because you yourself are born in St. Louis, am I right?
Yes, St. Louis, Missouri, in the middle of the country.
Yes, okay. Let's talk about your book, because now we just heard how the initial idea was based on your book. So then it leads me to the next question. When, why you started to write a book about the experience of your father or your parents, shall I say?
It goes back more than 20 years. In the late 1990s, I was asked to introduce a film about the great Canadian pianist Glenn Gould, and at a film festival of all things. And the person who ran the film festival asked me a few questions so that he could introduce me. He asked about my musical background, and I said that I took the requisite piano lessons when I was a child, but that my parents were both musicians, and they both played in this all-Jewish orchestra in Nazi Germany before managing to escape quite literally at the last minute in 1941. And the director of the festival looked at me and said, "Boy, that is some story. You ought to write a book."
Yeah.
And that's where it began. I began discussing his younger years with my father, which Anders just captured marvelously in his film. And of course, the great late lamented actor Bruno Ganz plays the role of my father.
Yeah. So, by the way, in a way, you just told me, about how it came around. But can I ask you the question, why?
Why I wrote the book?
Yeah.
Well, that I guess could be the basis for a very long conversation. And as you say, we only have an hour.
Yeah.
I grew up in a household where both of my parents lost their families to the Holocaust. We were Jews, but my father chose not to acknowledge that. I did not know that I was Jewish really until I was a teenager. I attended my first Seder when I was 17 years old.
What? You didn't? How about Passover, Pesach?
There was no Pesach in our household.
And how about mezuzot? So you didn't have that on your doorpost?
No, we had a Tannenbaum, a Weihnachtsbaum, a Christmas tree in our house, as did many a well-to-do Western German Jew. They were quite well assimilated, which is one of the reasons the Holocaust came as such an added shock to them, because they had felt for generations that they were very much a part of German society.
Yeah.
Until they weren't.
So to go back to what you said, so you had no Jewish background as you thought until you were 17, and then what happened then? So as I said, I'm talking about the why question. Why you wrote the book?
I really wanted to. The more I learned about my family, the more I wanted to reach back across the generations to make some sort of connection with them, since my father's family was all murdered, and my mother was an only child, and her mother was murdered. And actually, this process culminated, in one sense, when I turned 55 years old. I became a bar mitzvah boy. I became a man at the age of 55.
55? You had your 55 when you were born? Oh my God! And why you did it after 55 years? Why at all?
It was very important to me to establish myself in some public manner as a Jew, and that's why I took part in this 20-month study that culminated in my becoming a bar mitzvah.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I can ask Anas, the director. Anas, do you remember when you first time you contacted Martin? How did you? Because it's a very sensitive issue. It has a lot of sensitive issues in that issue. So I wonder, how did you approach him the first time?
Well, obviously, since Martin had written a book, he was already expressive about the subject, so I wasn't too nervous about that. It was clear he was a man who was keen to discuss all aspects of this matter, and including the generational question, which also was kind of unfolded even in the book. And confrontations are also in the book that we have taken inspiration for or kind of developed on. So I felt that was completely would be a relaxed conversation about what has passed, and also through Martin's fine sensibilities for Germany from the European reality. I thought there wouldn't be too much of a cultural gap here. It was just a question of getting started, and I felt ever since it was a very fluent working relationship. I never felt any obstacles of kind you suggest.
Okay, yeah. And how could you please tell us something about the all these techniques you used in your film, the mixed genres you used, the mixed media format you used? How did that come around, and how did you tell Martin about that idea? So two
But
questions.
I don't quite remember. I think I probably offered him to watch some of my movies before, because it's nothing new that I tend to do these things, to
Yeah.
make this kind of collage techniques,
Yeah.
grabbing everything from the shelves in order to tell the story.
Yeah.
This is basically the thing. The style is function, it meaning that the story dictates how the film should be told.
Yeah.
And
You did that
also,
earlier in the film called 1989.
correct, and also even more films. VJ even is actually a mix of
Yes.
techniques that I think many of your audience might be familiar with, because it also VJ also was I think an award winner at Movies That Matter, so it has a history in Holland too. So maybe some people recall.
Yeah.
Although it has a more uniform look, it is in fact, if you delve into the technique of making it, it was pretty much also mixing up genres and doing.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for years by now.
Yeah, great. It really worked out great, and I really digged your film, to put it very plain. And I have only one more question for you, and then we will go on to next speaker. But for now, for both of you, you had one of the greatest European actors, Bruno Ganz, and it was his final role. It was his final job as an actor. And you. So how did that go? How did you approach him? Someone who about 15 years before that, 14 years before that, who played Hitler, of all, in a movie, and now you are asking him to play in a documentary probably for the first time in his life. So how did you do that?
Well, to be honest, I never considered the film particular documentary. It applies documentary method, but for me it's a film, and that's I think right. Also was Bruno's approach to it. This is a film, that's all.
That's right, that's
the
right.
The genre is not really relevant. Also, we're telling a story by applying all kinds of techniques, documentary as well as dramatic, as you will agree.
Okay,
so,
please ignore that.
Yeah. No, it's all right. But for Bruno, it was like presenting any other script. So we approached his agent, and his agent, I think, a good fortune that the agent knew of 1989, the film we just referred to, and enjoyed and liked that movie.
Okay.
And then I think it coincided with a long time interest of Bruno's into the fate of the European Jews, or as a Jewry in Europe, and he had been thinking a lot about this subject. And was quite keen to discuss it. I think he was very, very interested in the subject matter, and that, of course, was helpful in convincing him to make a film.
Yeah, yeah. So and then I mean, I don't know how to put that. I read that he was he had cancer in 2018, and so when you start to shoot, so he was already sick or sick-ish. Do you remember that?
Yes, so we did, but he and we didn't know at the time what was the matter with him. He was uncomfortable during shooting. Nobody knew what it would be. It was stomach issues, but being the very disciplined professional he was, he just kept on working, of course. And as he had done, I'm sure, many other times with some illness, he would just not let it influence his work too much. And it was not, it's not a conscious thing when we were shooting, but then a few months after we had finished that part of it, he was then diagnosed with this terrible disease.
He died in February last year. By the way, Karin, I have just one more question for them. Do you have any questions for them as a filmmaker or a writer?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this film, if you can say that, because of the subject, but I think it was so beautifully done, and it has so many poetic resounding the story and the image, and also the end for me was very surprising. The first time I watched it, I thought, oh, it's over, and the second time I thought, well, but this is a very beautiful ending, because in fact it is not a finished story. The war has not ended for him, and I thought that was very nice. It's actually not a question, but
It's not a question. No. I don't see any question mark
no,
in there. No.
sorry.
Okay, but the
But
way
I
you
liked it.
told me that, by the way,
Yeah.
she said it was just too suddenly, just too suddenly. So can you please, maybe both of you, tell me something about the finishing, ending a film like that? When do you decide that's the end? So
Well, I think I have to take responsibility for that decision, how long the movie would be. And for me, it might sound cynical, but it's an old wisdom in the business that you should leave the audience hungry, rather too short than too long. We also talk about first exit, how to get as fast as possible out of your story. It sounds strange, but it really is something that keeps it vibrating.
yeah,
In my opinion.
yeah.
I'd much rather hear this complaint than that the film was too long.
Okay, cool. That's
For me,
good.
it suggests that you were into it, you want to know more,
Yeah.
and this is just a good thing for me, because that also means you will go and explore the subject matter.
Yeah,
You might read Martin's book, whatever. This
Yeah.
film opens doors into other things by not being too long.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Please allow me to have one more question. It's especially for maybe for Martin. Martin, did you have any artistic arguments? Like I wouldn't say fight, but maybe any fights or quarrels. Arguments about what to put forward and what not to mention. Could you please take us to that process?
I wouldn't say that anything ever rose to the level of even an argument. I think Honors and I clicked almost instantaneously. There are certain aspects of the book that I wished at the time there was more time to devote to.
Yeah.
But Honors quickly convinced me that in many instances less is more.
Mm-hmm.
And he, of course, is the filmmaker. He is the great cinematic artist, and he was always right. There were a few times when we would talk about, should we emphasize this word or that word, but nothing ever rose, as I say, even to the level of an argument.
Okay. How about the poster? Can we see the poster of the film? Yeah. What's the story behind this?
It's a poster. There might be many, by the way, in the career of a movie that might, as every distributor might choose his own artwork for his own territory. This is the Danish one you're looking at.
Yeah.
I quite like it because it has this kind of plays with a double identity of George Günther. And this is, of course, the idea. Because I would have wished it would have been obvious that we have George, the old man, standing there, and it's Günther, his young alter ego, so to speak, his younger self, on the other side.
Okay.
Aesthetically, I enjoyed the matching of the two landscapes, but actually, I think there might be many posters coming different, and they will look very different. That's a very kind of that's a commercial tool that doesn't send the film as such.
Yeah. By the way, I saw this poster in Amsterdam as well. I really like that. So, gentlemen, in about 10 minutes, I will come back to you with some questions about one of the main subjects of the movie, about the sense of belonging, about identity, or maybe plural identities. But for the next 10 minutes, I will have a conversation with Carine Alders, who is with the Leo Smith Foundation. And if there are any questions from the audience, please send it through Q&A to us, and I hope I can address the question to the speakers. Carine, so first of all, tell us something about the Leo Smith Foundation. What's that?
Yes, well, first of all, Leo Smith, he was a Dutch composer born in 1900, and he was killed in Sobibor in 1943. So he was one of the victims of the Holocaust. And after the war, he was completely forgotten because he wasn't around anymore to promote his own music. And after the war, many people wanted to look ahead. It was too painful to look back. And so his music, which safely survived the war because he gave it to a pupil and he cut off his autograph so that it would be safe. And after the war, his music was put into the archives of the Netherlands Music Institute. And in 1995 or 96, when Eleonore Pameyer, the flutist, was asked to play Jewish music in remembrance of the ending of the war, her pianist Frans van Rut pointed to this flute sonata that Leo Smit had written in 1942. It's his very last composition. And they performed it, and Eleonore had never before heard of it, and she thought, this music is so utterly beautiful. Why don't I know about this? Yeah. And there and then they decided they wanted to start a foundation to promote this music, and also the music of other composers who were suppressed during the war. And they thought, well, maybe there's 5 more. But during the 25 years that the foundation has worked and organized over 200 concerts, it turned out that we now have some 40 composers who lived and worked in the Netherlands and were persecuted by the Nazis. And we still haven't finished. And there were Jewish composers, but they were also composers who were in the resistance, so they refused to comply with Nazi rules and were therefore banned. They were refugees from Hungary, from Germany, so a lot in the film I recognize, because all these composers had the same decisions to take. Do I flee? Do I stay? All those, am I Dutch? Am I Jewish? All these questions are so familiar in all the research we did over the past few years.
Yeah, that's a very good
Yes.
sign that when this is a book about someone from Germany went to United States, and it still has impact on you. You recognize some of the
every
details.
every second. Yes.
Great to hear that.
Yes, and so we organized concerts so that the music would sound again, so that we could give it back to the audience.
Yeah.
Because that is, the Nazis may have killed these composers. Not all of them. Some survived in hiding, but we could not allow them to also kill their music, because then they would have won. Had their purpose would be complete. And so we started to dig up all this music and to perform it. And many of the concerts were broadcast by the Dutch radio. And so more and more people got to know about us and our mission. And sometimes they contacted us because they thought, well, I have something in the attic and maybe it is interesting. Nobody has ever heard of this composer, so I don't know what the quality is, but will you have a look at it? And one of these people who contacted us was Joyce Bergman, and she was the niece of composer Dick Kattenburg. And Dick Kattenburg was only 21 when the war broke out. He was very young. He'd never really gotten any of his compositions performed by a big audience, only once in the house of his teacher. And so no one ever heard of him when the war broke out. He was still very young. And actually he had lessons from Leo Smit. Dick Kattenburg was in hiding and Leo Smit was forced to move to a ghetto, awaiting his deportation to Sobibor. And they still had lessons by courier. They would write to each other. And Dick Kattenburg would say, I've written this, do you think I should have tuba or should I stick to cello? And then Leo Smit would write, stick to cello, that's bold enough. And so these two knew each other. And we only came to know that because Dick Kattenburg was in love. He was very young, and that what also reminds me of the film. He was in love with this flutist called Ima van Esso, and he wrote a sonata for her, and he gave it to her, and she survived actually the concentration camps, but she could never play it. It was too painful. And that's also very much like in the film. Günther or George doesn't play the flute anymore. And so she heard of the Leo Smit Foundation, and she sent this manuscript. She put it in an envelope and sent it by mail to Eleonore as a birthday present. And Eleanor started playing it, and the music was so fresh and youthful and full of energy and so lovely. It was actually a love letter. And she started playing it on the repertoire, and she actually played it all over the world in the United States. And then this Joyce Bergman, who was a niece of Dick Kattenburg, she got a new computer. And what did she do? She got internet and she Googled her name and her family name.
Yeah.
And then she found an announcement of this concert with Dick Kattenburg. And she thought, wait a minute, that's my uncle. And Joyce's mother, Daisy, who was Dick's sister, she survived the war in hiding. And she had just died recently. And Joyce thought, wait a minute, in the attic I have a box with music manuscripts. And she always thought, well, they're trials and they're just in pencil and maybe it's nothing. But then she took down the box and she started looking through and she thought, well, maybe it is interesting. So then she contacted the son of Ima van Esso, who is Ed Spanjaard. He's a very famous conductor in the Netherlands.
I know that name.
Yes. And so Ed contacted a few friends, musicians, and on a rainy afternoon, Sunday afternoon, they started playing all this music, and it was amazing. And it was this they called it, well, he got the nickname the Dutch Gershwin, because he was fond of jazz and he loved to watch the movies and so
let's hear something.
Yes, let's hear something.
So okay, I will
Tempo
ask
di Blues.
Yeah, what?
It's called Tempo di Blues. He was
Tempo
very
di
into
Blues.
blue notes.
Okay, let's hear something. Yeah. Great. Kind of bluesy and jazzy at the same time. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, you have a music background yourself, yeah? Am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us something about your music background.
Yes, I am an amateur viola player, and I'm also a musicologist.
Yeah.
A second chance career because my first studies was English language and literature. And then later on, I was thinking, well, I'd like to do something I will really like, and then I made my my love for music into my profession. So I studied musicology.
Okay.
And
Okay. One last question, and then I will try to have a conversation with three of you about, as I said, about sense of belonging. Can you tell us briefly about the similarities and the differences between the Dutch musicians during the war and the German situation?
Yes, well, of course, the German situation started probably already before 1933, but in 1933 it became very obvious that, Jews were not allowed to work anymore. They were turned down from their orchestra, they were sent away. And this amazing story about the Jüdische Kulturbund made that they probably didn't believe, they couldn't imagine, as we can't even imagine now, what would happen later. Yeah. So it took a long time until 1938 when the Kristallnacht and the pogroms and even then they thought, but this will soon be over. In the film, George says, well, then the war broke out and we were all happy because now soon the Germans, the Nazis would be defeated. Yeah. But the people in the Netherlands, of course, they knew what was happening in Germany, but they felt in the Netherlands we're safe because during the last war, the Netherlands was neutral.
Yeah, the First World War.
And
yeah.
yes, and so they thought we will be neutral again, so we're safe. And
We're safe.
and so even the composers who fled from Germany and the musicians, they didn't think, or well, some went on, but many built a new life for themselves, and they felt Dutch. They wrote a composition for the birth of Princess Beatrix, or they learned Dutch really fast. They found themselves a job in the radio, and they didn't think it would happen, but it did. And so when the war broke out, they were caught like rats in a trap. And so here also there was a Jewish symphony orchestra where Jews could only perform Jewish music for a Jewish audience. And so Leo Smith's music was also performed by them, and he used to joke to his Dutch pupil who wasn't Jewish and who he had given his manuscripts. He said, "Tonight we're playing Mahler and you can't come." So he also kept his sense of humor. But
dark humor.
And even till the last moment, Dick went into hiding, and he had very many different addresses because he kept being told. But he went to the cinema because he was young and he wanted to go out, and that's when he got caught in a razzia.
Yeah.
And also Leo Smith, he felt that if he would go without trouble, then he would survive. They would work hard and they would come back.
Yeah.
And even when they arranged for him to go to a different camp in Barneveld for artists, he wouldn't go because he couldn't take his wife with him, and they wanted to stay together.
Yeah.
So
that's how things go.
Yeah, that's very similar to the decisions you have to take.
Yeah.
Do I stay or do I go?
Let's watch another short clip. It's when Martin and Gunther, so father and son, they have a conversation about our next subject, sense of belonging, and how did you see it coming or not? Are you a Jew or not? So let's watch that, and then we will have a conversation.
Was soll ich länger weilen, dass man mich trieb hinaus? Lass ihre Hunde heulen vor ihres Herrn Haus.
So that means
Well, it means, why should I stay here longer when I'm driven out? Let angry dogs bark in front of their master's house.
But you must have seen it coming.
What do you mean?
You read the newspapers. I'm sure you weren't sitting around playing Mozart all the time. You must have seen it coming.
I never considered myself a Jew.
Dad, your name is Goldschmidt. Your grandfather's name was Moses Goldschmidt. Your great-grandfather was Levi Goldschmidt. You're as Jewish as gefilte fish.
I'm not a fish.
Okay, if there are any questions, please send the questions through chat to us. And for the next, for the final 20 minutes, I will have a conversation with three of you about the sense of belonging, identity, or maybe plural identities. Martin, let's start with you. You are an Jewish American, right?
Correct.
Or are you an American Jew?
I'm probably more of an American Jew. I'm not quite sure what the distinction is. But as I say, I think my father, having gone through a certain degree of persecution himself, managing to escape Germany with literally $4 in his pocket and having his entire family murdered by the Nazis, I think he decided at one point, if this is what it means to be a Jew, include me out. And he not only did not raise his two sons to be Jewish, he sort of rejected the entire idea. So, as I say, it wasn't until I discovered the fact that my parents had met playing in this all-Jewish orchestra. And again, just parenthetically, the Kulturbund was an orchestra, a theater company, an opera company made up entirely of Jewish artists who performed strictly for Jewish audiences.
Yeah.
I mean, to be a dancer or a flutist or a violist or to take tickets to the box office or to build sets, you had to be a Jew, and only Jews were allowed to attend these performances.
Yeah.
And when I found out about that identity, it only increased my desire to learn more about my background and I guess my people.
Yeah. So you said it increased your desire and about your background. Maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but did it make you angry a little bit because it wasn't told? It wasn't told to you for a long time. Maybe not at all. You understand what I mean?
Yes, I think I understand. It was frustrating. But at the same time, I think I understood ultimately my father's guilt. He, as I say, he arrived in this country with $4 in his pocket. There was very little he probably could have done to save his family, but he went to his grave thinking that he did not save his family. Mm-hmm. He was beset with a crippling sense of guilt throughout most of his life, which the honors film, eventually touches on, and quite in a very, very poignant way.
Yeah.
So, yes, there are all kinds of mixed feelings, but I guess that's part of life, and it's certainly part of the artistic life.
Yeah. And where do you belong to?
Me?
Yeah, Martin, for you.
No.
Yeah, where do you belong to?
Where do I belong?
Yeah.
I belong here in America, but I also feel very strongly my German roots. In doing research for the book, I spent a lot of time in my father's hometown of Oldenburg, which is about 40 miles from the Dutch border.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to know some just wonderful, wonderful people in Oldenburg.
Yeah.
And my father, towards the end of his life, he suffered from dementia, and in the place where he was living, I would go visit him, and many, many times we would plan a return journey to Oldenburg, a journey that I knew would never take place, but one that he loved talking about. Yeah. That he would show me the beautiful park, the Schlossgarten, where he would play as a child. Yeah. And it was through his love of his homeland, I certainly learned my own love of Germany, despite all of the complications of the war years.
Yeah. May I see the director, Anas?
Yes.
Yeah. When I watched your movie, there are some addresses, some names of the streets. Very specific streets and names and the numbers of houses. I wrote it down, and I looked it up. Google Maps. I really love that in that way. Very specific. You took me to the next. I wouldn't say maybe next level or another level of watching a movie. Could you please tell us, because we know that everything you put in the film, especially when it's based on a book, you think about it. Why should I put this and not other things? Because you have limited amount of minutes. So tell us, please, a little bit about us, about putting all his background in a very specific way in the picture, the importance of that, the relevance of that.
Yeah, you have when you make a film, you have to think a lot about it, but you also have to feel a lot about it.
Uh-huh.
I mean by that you kind of you just I always talk about let's take a walk in the movie. Long before it's written, we just go and with my collaboration partners, not least my co-director Ashibet, or I might even done with Martin. Let's take a walk, which means you go and imagine the movie quite simply from the beginning. How would you like it to start, and what happens next? And I wonder what happens next. You're curious about your own film. What's going to be the next scene? You let your imagination try to play with it. And in fact, this is more how I would describe the process than sitting with a lot of material and considering whether to include something or not. It's not so selective. It's more like you let your intuition lead you. What kind of moods, what kind of images do you get in your head from, for instance, reading this book?
Okay.
And to a large degree, you should follow that, and then the story will unfold.
Yeah.
So, but in the case of Günther's background and childhood, obviously we would have to go to those castle gardens in Altenburg, because that was his Eden. It was his rosebud. No way around it. So, and since I'm also not parks anyways, it fit me quite nicely to go and shoot there. And I have to admit, it's also the environment of Oldenburg, northern Germany. It's not really that far from my own Danish childhood in northern Copenhagen. So there's also a nostalgic note for that for myself in doing it. I felt in general quite close to George's North German cultural background.
Yeah, you could you could relate to that, and something
Absolutely.
something I wondered. That's a question for both of you about to relate to a new country, because when Gunther and his wife, they went to United States, in a way they left everything behind them, and they started to adapt. They just cut off, and that's something. Maybe you, both of you, or Martin specific, you can elaborate about that process. Is it something that happens to a lot of migrants coming to United States, or is it something for I don't know, Jewish people? Is it something for people of music? Because to give you an idea, the story of the singer, one of the lead singers of the Kiss, the band, Gene Simmons. When he went to the United States, he became Gene Simmons. While he was in Israel, he was Chaim Witz. And I wondered, is that something that America does to people?
Well, my father was born Günther Ludwig Goldschmidt. When he arrived on Ellis Island, he changed his name. He decided that Ludwig was too German. After all, they arrived in 1941.
Yeah.
He took his first name, Günther, removed the umlaut, and his middle name became Gunther.
Yeah.
And for his new first name, he chose the first name of the first president of his new country, George Washington.
Wow.
So it became George Gunther Goldsmith.
Yeah.
The United States is a nation of immigrants.
Yeah.
And this is something that is roiling the political waters of this country right now, as I'm sure many of you know, as our current president is announcing that he doesn't want certain people from certain parts of the world to come into the United States.
Yeah.
And those of us who are children of immigrants, just for instance, feel a great solidarity with the people who want to come to the U.S.
Yeah.
So that's very much a part of our present at the moment.
Yeah. So to please correct me if I'm wrong. To finalize this, you don't see that part as a negative thing. Putting things behind you and adjust to a new country, even going as far as your name.
Every person obviously will make that individual choice. I do think that one of the strong aspects of American culture is the way it has it has preserved, some would say, has stolen, but has preserved cultures from other parts of the world and brought them into the borders of the United States, so that there are people of Irish descent who celebrate St. Patrick, or there are Italians who celebrate San Gennaro.
Yeah.
It is, at least when the country is working correctly, it is what we used to call a melting pot.
Yeah. Yeah. And you always put your background, whether it's ethnic or it's religious, you put that first and then American. So it's Afro-American, Italian-American, Irish-American. Am I right?
Yes, in theory. And yes, I think that is the way it should work.
Yeah. Okay. And could you please, yes, could you please tell us about, you just mentioned that a couple of minutes ago, but elaborate more about that sense of adjustment when, for example, German musicians came to Holland, avoiding the war, fleeing for the war, and how they managed or didn't manage to adjust to Holland?
Yes, for example, Willem Rettich was one composer from Germany who, like Martin's grandfather, had also fought in the First World War, and he was taken prisoner, sent to Siberia, and from Siberia over China came back to Leipzig, where he got a job for the radio.
Wow.
The
Such a
stories are
story.
bizarre.
Yeah.
And then when Hitler came to power, he was denied access to the radio building, and he decided to flee to the Netherlands. And he was called, of course, Wilhelm Rettich, but in the Netherlands his name would be Willem.
Willem, yes.
Willem.
Yeah.
And another example is Hans Lachmann, whose actual name is Heinz Lachmann. And he lived in Berlin, where he played saxophone in Haus Vaterland and jazz bands, and he wrote for the film, and he came to the Netherlands and he changed his name in Hans Lachmann. And they both got the Dutch citizenship after the war. And Hans Lachmann really made a new living in the Netherlands, and he continued working for the radio, and his children grew up here, and he survived in hiding. Willem Rettich also survived in hiding. But after the war, he was very much an opera composer and opera conductor. And opera in Germany is really great. You have an opera house in every town, whereas in the Netherlands you only have 2 or 3 left. And so, and at that time you didn't even have 3, maybe just 1. And so he couldn't find his way around. He was an opera director, and there was no opera culture in the Netherlands. So in the end, later in his life, he went back to Germany. So it's different. But and Hans Lachmann actually also had his Jewish identity. He also wrote for the synagogue music.
Wow.
And he also played music in the synagogue. So he was an active Jewish, but I don't think Willem Rettich was.
Okay. The final question I have for you for the let's say last 7 minutes for the 3 of you is about the relevance of the film for now, because on itself it's a great movie. Looking back, I really, as I said, I love the story, and I love the way it was told, the craftsmanship of the director. So that was great, looking back. But I wonder whether for you or for the gentleman via the Zoom, whether there is any relevance, importance for us right now. So let's start with you.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is don't ignore the signs. That things are happening, and people often say, yes, but that was then, and you can't compare, and you're not allowed to compare, but people back then didn't think it would happen either. So who's to say it won't happen again? I mean, recognize the signs and do something about it.
Yeah, it's like it's something that Martin, that happens in the film, you didn't you see that coming?
No.
Okay,
No.
so that's
Yeah.
okay. We have to be alert. Okay. By the way, I'm going to the Zoom, and so that will be my question. As I said, the relevance for right now. But I see some just small questions for the gentleman over there. Okay, let's see. Martin, did you have you written any other books?
I have. This book that this film is based upon is called The Inextinguishable Symphony, and it's primarily about my mother and father. I then, about 10 years after I wrote that book, I followed my grandfather and uncle, my father's father and my father's younger brother. They were two of the 900 Jewish refugees on board the infamous refugee ship, the St. Louis. Turned away first from Cuba, then the United States, and then Canada. The ship then sailed back to Europe. My grandfather and uncle disembarked in France. They spent 3 years being sent from one French internment camp to another before being sent to their deaths in Auschwitz. And I followed in their footsteps some years ago, and I went to all the places they were held. And I wrote about their journey and about my journey following in their footsteps. That book is called Alex's Wake. And in between, I wrote a book about the Beatles coming to America in 1964.
Okay. I have another question for others. Why the title, Winter Journey, Winterreise?
Oh, it came about quite organically. It came quite late in the process, to be honest. I didn't really know what to call this film until we were finishing the editing. There is, of course, a reference to this title in the beginning, the opening scene, where George is singing Die Winterreise from Schubert. So it was there in the material. But then, interestingly, without really having a plan for this, we started to work more and more on winter motifs as we got deeper and deeper into the story. And winter evolved as a kind of a metaphor for the Holocaust. You will see that we have scenes with snow in the desert. Now, this was actually something that only developed in the editing process. Is somehow the archive, we already have winterly scenes from archive that kind of attracted me and the editor. And so we would pull towards that, so to speak, that metaphor, that imagery of the winter. And then it was, I think, a co-director, Ashbeck, said, why don't you call Winter Journey? It was like, eureka. Yes, it brings everything together. Because we had actually instinctively worked in that direction all the time.
Yeah. Okay. One more question, and that's a question from Glenn. And we only have 3 minutes, so I hope you can answer this. Okay, that's a question. Thank you for making such a beautiful and important film. There has been a lot written, filmed, and said about this period. What does this film add that was missing, and why was it important to tell that now? It's a question by Tomer, by the way.
True.
The question, shall I repeat the question?
Yeah.
Okay, the question is, a great movie, and beautiful movie, a strong movie, important movie. There has been a lot written, filmed, and said about this period. What does this film add that was missing? And
Yeah, I think one thing that really inspired me in a kind of, on a very broad level note, is that I felt that the narrative about the persecution of Jews and the Holocaust, for that matter, has been very much iconized by the Polish condition. Meaning, if you take Schindler's List and other films, you will see SS officers invading ghettos in Poland, or little shtetls, where life is very traditional and orthodox even. But Jewish life is something very distinctly separate from other citizens, from the Polish people. Now, this I felt there was always something missing in the description of the persecution of Jews, and that was the fact that most Jews in Western Europe, at least, in my world, in Holland and Germany, lived like everybody else. And that it was this level, as you were mentioning, you were touching on this early on, that there was a double shock, because me, Jew, was, that whole thing was not the Polish thing or the Russian thing. That was a German thing and a Dutch thing, and the French thing and the Scandinavian thing. And this is a very, very important part of the whole story. That people had almost forgotten what differed them from their neighbor.
Okay.
And even more horrifying, what happened So I felt this portrait of the German Jews, Western Jews, if you like, couldn't be, as this subject matter would simply put everything together in order to understand.
Yeah, great job. I have to finish up. Thank you so much, Andreas Euskert and Martin Goldsmith and Karin Alders. And Movies That Matter meets the correspondent. Watch the documentary and Frame the Wereld. It's about the different newcomers try to find their way in Holland, their wishes and dreams versus the possibilities and the abilities. And it will be shown between June 26th and July 5th via the correspondent.nl. And please check our websites and the socials. And every day there are interesting programs on Pakhuis de Zwijger on behalf of the Movies That Matter. And Pakhuis de Zwijger, I thank you very, very much. And if you have any money left, don't hesitate to give it a little bit to Pakhuis de Zwijger. Pay as you like. Pay as you like. Pay as you like.